Speech Pitch by Iska Sak.
Hello everyone and welcome back to Speech Pitch. In case you're new to our podcast, let me introduce myself. I am Catarina Botelho.
And I am Francisco Teixeira, and we will be your hosts for this episode.
We're very excited to bring you a new episode. This time we have here with us Shri Narayanan. Welcome Shri, and thank you so much for accepting our invitation and taking the time to chat with us.
So delighted to be with you all.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Shri. So, Shri, you're a professor of electrical and computer engineering, computer science, linguistics, psychology and neuroscience, pediatric, otolaryngology, head and neck surgery at the University of Southern California. You're also the co-founder of two companies, Listen and Behavioral Signals. And as if this was not enough, all of the members of the team that is producing Speech Pitch, who work in very different subfields of speech like privacy, health, children's speech and prosody, acknowledge that you have made significant contributions to their fields, not to mention all the other fields that you have worked on. With all of this in mind, what we would like to start by asking you is, how did this come about, and how would you describe your path, the path you took to reach this point in your career?
Well, thank you for that. It's kind of a little embarrassing when you put it that way. I would say, I've been fortunate to have been, have had the opportunities to be in places with right mentors and right collaborators over these last almost 3 decades of my work and involvement in what is core is speech processing, various aspects of understanding people through how they communicate using speech, spoken language, interaction, other sort of modalities, both sort of in the service of understanding the human condition, how people produce and process speech and language, how the various aspects of behavior, including affective behavior, how people express, perceive, and what happens when some of these things don't work out, because of some sort of a condition change, context changes, including due to health status differences. So as a result, right, because of this core interest of what is human-centered, the connections are naturally, wide and and broad. Whether it is thinking about theoretical aspects in linguistics or psychology, or more translational questions in health and medicine. So it naturally kind of fit in. And as I said, with the right kind of connections and people, I was sort of constantly had the opportunity to learn and try to contribute. And of course, I should underscore, right, alongside this collaborators, one of the big part of my collaborators have been, and continue to be, are the students I've had the just honor of working with over the years. And so all these kinds of titles and so on, right, are just sort of reflective of what other people have helped contribute. And I just go along for the ride.
So as you say, you have many different collaborations and work in a multidisciplinary research, right, with different people. But for us as PhD students, we often start with very specialized topics, right? And I guess that's normal, but how do we evolve from this to being able to do some multidisciplinary research? How do you foster these collaborations and with researchers from different disciplines?
That's a very good question. It's an ongoing process, I feel, right, because a lot of it at core is driven by, one's own curiosity and interest, right? I always think that knowledge and skills can be acquired, right? Once we kind of are interested and passionate about a particular question. For example, I was always interested in sort of, a question of variability, as children, develop, right? Originally, when I was thinking about it, it didn't even, cross my mind at that point. Things beyond just, development that is biological, that their children are growing physically, socially, and so on. And then a lot of the other sort of perturbations to this also came into play. What about differences, neurodiversity, for example? What about learning differences, etc.? And so each of that kind of, poses interesting angles and questions. And then, we can start learning and listening to experts and other colleagues and trying to come up with a common understanding of these questions of interest and together come up with solutions. So one of the things I feel that has been very important is to listen, and to listen sort of what are sort of the key questions or that colleagues and perspectives that people offer to the same problem. And these kinds of multifaceted perspective together, right, adds up to something that's greater than sort of these individual things that each of us may come up with. And that has been very joyful, I think, and of course, it does have a lot of challenges, right? Because, we're always out of our comfort zone, because it's just impossible, I feel, and I feel like presumptuous if you even think about, oh, we have knowledge in all these various aspects, at the level of depth, but in a way that we can think about how to sort of, both acquire and use and together create this knowledge, apply this knowledge, right, in the service of answering some question of scientific interest. Or as engineers, right, we also want to take some of these scientific ideas to make into useful applications or outcomes, right, whether it's tools or assistants and so on to help people. And so I think that aspect also is very helpful to be able to learn, think, and be open-minded, and also sort of understand that we may be wrong, and often we are, and correct ourselves.
Do you think there are any core lessons that you have learned from working with people of different disciplines?
Yeah, so from each of the fields, right? Each field has its own sort of, way it has evolved, and their own methods and approaches, right? And that's been enriching, right? They have different levels of rigor. For example, how they read and cite literature, for example, how methodological experimental design, for example, each of the fields emphasizes, or at least, the interaction that I've had. And, it's a learning experience. And, above and beyond, right, the knowledge per se comes from, right, so people, like, for example, speech and language is of interest across fields, right, linguists are interested in aspects about, the theoretical aspects about how, for example, sounds are organized in the world's languages, and, the mental representations of those, structural aspects of it, and so on. In psychology, people are very interested in, the use of speech and language, that tells us something about, our internal sort of, states and traits, and how, what happens if something is disrupted, and so on. So we learn these various perspectives, the theoretical foundations that, we always are on the shoulders of others, right? Like scholars before us, scientists before us. And, each field, provides us that kind of an opportunity. And none, our own sort of, field of speech communication sort of exemplifies this connection, right? It's almost acts as like this nucleus that connects all these various fields together in a beautiful way. And that's why, for me, ISCA and Interspeech are like most favorite places, because, this really is interdisciplinary. You look at the conference, you see everything from, linguistics and paralinguistics to sort of, technological application, and in fact, and special domains. Everything is covered. There's this dialogue that happens, and that's kind of enriching, right? And so,
is it ever hard to establish good communication? Because you mentioned that people from different disciplines are sometimes used to different criteria or different methods.
Right, absolutely. I think that's a very good question, right? How do we communicate about communication? Right? Like in any human interaction or relationship building, right? It takes time. I personally, these are things that I kind of feel that have been helpful for me. First is mutual respect for sort of the fields and the way people pose and ask questions. That is, and the methods that they have, and see sort of the value and sort of, what it brings. Likewise, ours also being able to explain and find these common ground. And then together we can say, well, okay, what are the open questions and how can we do it together? I think that has been a big part of this collaborative approach to both at the intellectual level and the interpersonal level, I think, is important. And open communication and transparency is also sort of critical.
So we're talking about multidisciplinary research, and You've been working on the intersection of arts and science, right? We saw some papers on understanding the emotions evoked by artworks, and also works on the analysis of portrayal of movie characters. So can you tell us a bit about these works? Where did these ideas come from?
Sure. So the general interest, as I said, of mine and of my lab, has been trying to sort of understand the human sort of condition, their interaction with one another in the world, and applications that relate to that, right? To say, how can we use technologies to support and enhance human experiences? So arts, media arts in general, has been a big part of that. Right? Music has been a very close sort of realm for many people that are interested in speech and audio, for example. And I'm not any different from that. I'm a musician myself, and I've always been interested in sort of understanding music, both sort of for example, the closest one can think about is song production, just like speech production. How do people use their vocal instrument to produce sounds that we perceive as sort of music that has affective, creates affective sort of experiences in the listeners, and different kinds of music, right? So we've studied like both the physics of sort of, for example, like opera singing, beatboxing, and art forms through sort of the scientific eye, bringing methodologies that you kind of been using in studying speech and so on. So that's one angle. The other is like, we see with this sort of, even the current resurgence of signal processing, machine learning, and so on, many art forms can be viewed and understood. Okay, first of all, from a content analysis perspective, what is that a creator, right? Whether it is lyrics of a song or other music forms, right, can be sort of understood from using these tools, right? So that's another angle we could use. How can we understand, for example, structural aspects, just like we use linguistic theory, like about phonology and syntax to study speech. We can use music theory, right? To look at like music forms. That's another angle of applying machine learning to understand music. Of course, the other side of it is how people experience music, right? Like, of course, we know that music has this impact on us, both that we feel and that our body reacts to, right? Physiologically, neurally, but also behaviorally. We bop our heads, but we listen to it again, we pay for it. So understanding these affective experiences to music listening is also some angle. So that's one part of the art, like music, sort of how we create and process and perceive music has been some direction that we've been working in our lab. The other is sort of looking at media, sort of broader media forms like film and television and streaming and all that stuff, and to understand there again these multimodal signal processing, machine learning of speech and dialogue, the visual scenes, who's there, what are they doing, how are they portrayed. So that kind of we got interested in from an angle of saying, okay, what used to be just yet another sort of domain where we can study speaker diarization and dialogue interactions and so on. But what we said, well, there's lots of things in the art and how it's created and portrayed may have sort of questions about inclusive representations or disparities there. So one of the things that with some collaborators in Hollywood we started asking was, it seems like anecdotally that women, for example, are seen and heard less than men, right? In film and television, that has impact, right? How people are portrayed. It's not beyond presence. Also, stereotyping and other kinds of aspects happen for women and other sort of underrepresented parts of our society. So some of the results we showed that, like for example, women, are only seen and heard about a third of the time, right? But the movies that they are leading in make as much or more money. So it's not a business proposition. So diversity is important. We've also shown that similar things with ads, advertisements. We applied this with in collaboration with the United Nations in their meetings, that we could actually see participation of delegates that are women from other countries, how much floor time do they get, and are they given opportunities? Because you have to be able to participate to be heard, right? And how does it shape other kinds of policies and so on and so forth. So that's another art form involvement. And the final one that you talked about, again, relates to affective experience. Recently, we've been looking at just visual art and see what impact it has on people, because all these things, right, like modulate and mediate our affective experiences, right? When we look at a piece of art, it has some impact on it. So we wanted to understand how can we relate a given piece of art and how it is sort of what impact it has on an individual or group of people. And so the recent work was focused on that. In general, this is also this kind of understanding human response to media experiences is very useful in clinical domains as well, right? How people process and respond to affective stimuli is something of much interest, say, in domains where, like in mental health and in behavioral health, for example, children with on the autism spectrum disorder have different ways in which they process emotional sort of stimuli, right? Likewise, people like with other neurological disorders have different ways that they process speech, language, music, and so on. So this kind of provides also additional sort of layers of interesting possibilities. The study of arts beyond just being fun.
So basically, all of this work that you're talking about has a lot of social impact, right? And it's not only in this work, but you also have worked on issues like child speech recognition, and also technologies for training and assessing psychosocial interventions. So is this something that you have been consciously more or less pursuing through your career? And what is your motivation behind this?
Well, absolutely. Thank you, Francisco, for that question. So we've always been sort of interested in doing sort of things that have some societal meaning and value. That's always been my passion. And in fact, one of the I worked in industry before coming back to academia as a professor. Even there, my work on children, right, started at Bell Labs, and I wanted to see how can we develop technologies that can help, for example, a segment of our society that doesn't speak or read or do things like, say, grown-ups, right? Like, for learning, for example, learning to read. And then this kind of connections between what I wanted to work on the technology front and what it could potentially impact either near term or at least perhaps longer term has always been there. So when I was in the university, this became, the scope of what I could do became broader, the possibilities, because of all the interdisciplinary connections we talked about earlier. And so societal connections became sort of an important part of that. And because our sort of, the study of speech and spoken communication, right, is like so rich and inherently so diverse, right? Because each of us produces and processes, for example, speech in very unique ways. Even though we speak the same language, our context and who we are, and and all the various factors come into play in how we communicate, right? So both understanding this sort of rich diversity and the variability, and trying to see how we can translate that into experiences that are in tune in support of individuals and groups, right, has been sort of a very interesting and challenging technical problem, but has very important sort of an application. So, for example, right, if we can understand, we know as children develop, their speech patterns change, not only how they sound, but also the words they sort of start using, the linguistic structure, the use of nonverbal cues, and so on. On top of it, if there are differences in this developmental trajectory because of, say, for example, neurocognitive conditions such as autism, then that adds another dimension of variability. So if we were to build technologies and tools both to shine light on those differences and then use it to see how we can build robust and inclusive technologies, right? It provides these two sides of coin, and that has always been sort of very satisfying and fulfilling, when we think about the difference. So the domain of children is like very good example of that, and something that we continue to work even today, because these are tough problems, and while the community, we have made advances, we're still long ways to go.
Exactly. Because of that, what do you feel are still the biggest challenges that on this type of research?
Absolutely. I'll start with since we're talking about speech and speech processing, right? Even 5 years, 10 years ago, right, we didn't imagine the sort of this ubiquitous prevalence of some of the speech technologies, on mobile devices, in the cars, at home, and so on, right? The acquisition of audio, the processing of audio, both the signal and then the interpretation of this to make a lot of very useful applications, right, for information access, for interaction. But now imagine, right, a signal like speech carries so much rich information about not only your intent, but your affective state, who you are, the language you speak, your health status. So, and all this kind of provides opportunities to see how we can support people in what they want, right? I'll come back to that point. And so that opens up a lot of very interesting potential applications globally, worldwide, right? Everyone around the world, uses speech and language. And so we can think about applications in learning and education at scale that we didn't imagine before. I think, in health, right? Because speech and spoken language provide sort of in an inverse problem way insights into sort of underlying neurocognitive state differences. And in fact, that's what people use, right? Look at language differences across the lifespan, whether it is a child or in dementia, or other health conditions like depression and so on. And so how can we really make this again available across, languages and cultures, and, make sure speech-based tools, building upon all these exciting advances that, that's happening, in all this industry and in academia. And so those two areas really excite me, particularly with a global view, right? Because, across languages, but as I said, right, while, a topic that some of you are very intimate with, this is also sort of, there's also a lot of very interesting ethical and other questions that come about, right? That we can gain some insight about a particular person's emotional state or some aspect of their identity, perceived identity, right? Whether it's age, gender, whatever it is. What should we do, right? How do we protect what people want? How do we assure sort of privacy and build trust in using these speech processing and speech communication technologies? How do we protect against malicious sort of activities, right? How people can use and abuse these kinds of technology. So they open up these opportunities. Also open up more opportunities to kind of that as sort of scientists and technologists we are able to provide for our community, and that again, then that underscores, okay, more PhD theses need to be written, more sort of deeper research needs to be done and tested and so on. So that keeps our field, I think, very vibrant and and at the same time contributing, as we move along to the global community.
So sometimes it's not easy to move from pure research to applications that can be deployed in real world scenarios, right? Especially maybe in these areas that have large social impact or deal with more delicate matters. Do you relate to this, or do you feel that your research has had a real world impact?
In small ways, I would hope so. I'm striving for that, and like every researcher, right? So as sort of just academic researchers, one way we do is by sharing our work in a timely fashion through our publications, but also through our sort of as much as possible the data and tools that we create, so that that can help build. The other is to see, to take it to the next step, right? So many, since I'm talking to the students activity council, like so many of our students are also now have entrepreneurial ambitions and interests, right? So another way of creating impact is to take core research ideas and taking it into, that's another way of making impact for the society, right? There's, it's exciting actually to start up or contribute to that way and participate. That's another way. So our lab has done a little bit now, and through my students, they've had they've written patents, and they've been part of doing this. For example, the one recent patent is called spell check for bias. It's based on natural language processing, analyzing, say, movie scripts and books to look for sort of, characters and stories and how characters are portrayed, and how much and stereotyping. So just like a spell check tool we have, right, whether we're spelling right, it just looks for these dimensions of potential biases that may be in documents. So this is just an example. So timely publication and sharing, entrepreneurial aspects, and then of course, working with and taking ideas to sort of industries is like a big part of our community, right? A lot of wonderful things are happening. After all, many of the PhDs from such as yourself are not only going to academia, but also going to industry, or be in both, right? These days that happens in our community a lot. And so that's another way of making big impact. And of course, participating in national sort of projects and laboratories. And so different ways, and it takes time. Katrina, that's so true, right? This is not something we say, well, I have an idea, immediately it goes. It takes a lot of time, frustration, challenges. Often, while it's kind of, somewhat painful sometimes, that's a natural course of sort of, progression of ideas to get tested and, and truly sort of make an impact at scale. But the possibility of this interconnected world makes it sort of, some of this expedited, right? That we can think about, because of this network connection, because of phones close to people, right? Because since we are very people-centric in our field, having connection to people is important, whether it's through Zoom or to see we are, time zones away, but able to have a conversation. Imagine speech technologies that come in and support specific experiences. Because a lot of the part of the world there, they don't even have a written form of the language. They're not, a lot of literacy challenges. So a lot of possibilities to make an impact with the technologies that each of you are working on.
That's so encouraging. I mean, it's hard, but there's a lot of room for opportunities. And,
absolutely, yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. But you've created 2 companies, right? So tell us about that. How did you decide to create or co-found these companies? What pushed you forward? Yeah,
so happy to share my the experience. And so the first company, the Behavioral Signals, came out of our work in affective computing and emotion. So we were interested in not just what people are saying, but how they are saying it was an idea. And we worked a lot on some of the foundational methods, right? How do we estimate perceived aspect of affective states, expressed in voice and language, and in faces and body language and so on. Thanks to all the good research by our team members, right? A lot of body of work that emerged, and as a part of that, our lab also had a patent on this emotion recognition idea, and at the same time, the field was also sort of developing rapidly, right? This whole AI resurgence that was happening, and with this sort of advances in conversational technologies and in general AI, human-centered AI. So the importance of affect and in understanding and supporting people's experience became important. It was a natural sort of opportunity to see, hey, can we take some of these ideas and launch it for commercialization? And so I help with that launch part, but I'm not involved in day-to-day. I know my limitations, and I'm not I don't know how to run sort of businesses, and that requires dedicated expertise. And so our colleagues and people who run that. But the idea of what was rewarding was being able to take ideas from the lab to take it out and launch that startup. The second startup, Listen, is collaboration. Again, we've had several years of collaboration with colleagues, clinicians, and psychologists on the mental health arena, particular aspect of psychotherapy, which is people use experts talk to patients and clients to help them with their the challenges they're facing. So, but psychotherapy, because it's human centered, we don't know what works for whom, how, and why. So quality assurance is still sort of an open question. So since it's conversation based, so using speech language processing, can be assessed and provide some insights into, and that was kind of the basis of that work. And again, this was an opportunity because of the scale, and nowadays a lot of these happen even tele ways, and so that led to that. Again, I know I was a co-founder, helped launch, translate ideas, but I'm not involved in day-to-day business. There are other things that have been licensed. I would like to highlight two of my students. Both are professors now. Theodora Aspari, she's a professor at Texas A&M, and Addie Timmons. They were colleagues, when they were PhD students, working under mentorship on wearable sensing and speech and language processing in the wild, so to speak. And their ideas of trying to do predictive ways of thinking about, say, an upcoming conflict or an upcoming sort of event of psychological interest, right? And so that was very exciting. And so they had also together, created a couple of patent applications, and they started a startup. And even though both are professors, they also have a company that has licensed this technology, and they're collaborating on some of the research that through that company. So that's super exciting. So in addition to sort of them publishing, they had patents, and they also sort of went this extra step of entrepreneurial adventure as well, in addition to being professors, and that's super exciting to see.
Yeah, I think it's super important. It's something that most of us probably never see happening, which is translating the ideas from our lab to the real world. But leaving that aside for a moment, so we've talked a lot about the social impact of your research, but there are also other factors on doing research, right? And we wanted to ask you, so do you ever do research just for the fun of it? And as an example of what we mean by this, we found a paper that you wrote, actually a couple of papers about beatboxing. Do you want to tell us a little bit about it?
Sure. Well, first of all, right, research should be fun, right? While we want it to be important and the outcome should be sort of, has some meaning to you, that meaning itself, provides you sort of joy and fun. And, some are more lighthearted, beatboxing at the surface, right? It seems like, oh goodness, we are studying a beatboxer, which is fun, right? Because it's a very novel art form and these artists are making these incredible sounds, and we want to know, hey, what is behind that? And so that's how it started. But there were some scientific questions behind that as well. One, we wanted to know the sounds people were creating. We wanted to know how are they related to the sounds that are familiar in the world's languages. Are people using the same vocal instrument to create things that are novel, or can it be described from what we know from, linguistics, right, phonetics? So that was first step we did. The other is because these are people learn to make these use this vocal instrument to create this. We wanted to see what impact does it have on rehabilitation when this vocal instrument is perturbed because of, say, some injury or illness or surgery, right? For example, for cancer, what they do is they do radical surgery of removing parts of this. And then when patients try to rehabilitate to regain function of swallowing and speaking, they're trying to re-exercise this instrument, vocal instrument, that is, And so do insights from the learnability aspects, provide. So those were some of the scientific questions. But beyond that, we really wanted to see, hey, how do these beatboxers, produce? And that was so much fun. When we first saw the vocal dance, I don't know if you've seen some of the videos, they're incredible what humans are capable of doing. And we found that they can create things, both, using amazing shapes, incredible sounds that in fact have not been documented in world's languages, and that was exciting. So of course, these are also provide us, a way to talk about science and technology to a broader public, especially to young, students and K through 12 schools, because music always connects with people, and beatboxing, right? And so that was also fun. So a lot of these arts and, human-centered things like, mental health attract media. And that provides us another opportunity for us to talk about the science of, and technology of speech and other signal processing machine learning that we do, and contextualize in ways that connect with society, right? And that's another opportunity we can sort of contribute. And of course, this beatboxing has been in the news a lot, like, television and BBC and all that stuff. So that's fun too. But the best part in Interspace in Stockholm, my undergraduate student, she's also a beatboxer. She was in the same stage as where they do Nobel lectures, I hear, and beatboxing and showing these MR videos. And that was hilarious. I thought that was fun. Incredible.
Wow, incredible. We need to go look for the videos and watch them as well. There's another completely different topic that we also want to talk to you. So you've been very involved in the scientific community, right? You've participated in ISCA and IEEE, and have been editor of different journals, including the editor for the Computer, Speech and Language Journal. And also you have a lot of papers and a lot of citations, which is really impressive. So we're really interested in hearing your opinions on the current publication system and the metrics for evaluating researchers. So what's good about the system, or there's any space for improvement?
Absolutely. Very good question. I think as scientists and researchers, right, we stand on the shoulders of people before us, right? And we learn from what people have done. We share our ideas and get feedback from our peers. And then hopefully try to see some of our ideas could contribute and impact future researchers, right? So it's a very community-based effort and very social in that sense, right? Because we're all connected. So what you are doing as volunteers and being a part of this community is like very commendable, and thank you for doing that. I think I hope more students join, and because this is like a community effort. So in terms of publications, right, these days we are sharing not only ideas in terms of written papers that describe our ideas and work, but also the artifacts that go along with it, right? Whether it's just data, tools, software, so that it's reproducible, it's easily usable for the next step. Many ways, right? Because of the sharing that's happening, the volume is also sort of increased a lot, and so there are many venues through which we can share, right? Like conferences is supposed to not just have a paper, but also have a way to get feedback, right? Not only through the review process, but when you are presenting, interacting with colleagues, with senior researchers, getting feedback in a timely way, and modifying and changing that. Likewise, sort of in archival sort of venues, journals, and so on, provide a rigorous way that is vetted by peers. Lots of room for improvement, right? Because timely publication provide this value add, right? Because we can put out stuff, right? These days we have many unreviewed things where you can put our idea out. But what a community provides, like we are, is colleagues, peers providing thoughtful feedback, right? So that we can jointly improve that. Every paper we publish in, say, for example, speaker recognition, speech recognition says we improve word or rate by this much, or if you add all that up in some nice nonlinear function, we should be way ahead, right? So, but we're still like not, if you think about it. And so there's always room to improve and how to improve these things. And, that has to be contextualized. So timely publication is important. So anything that supports that, especially for early career researchers, try that, getting timely feedback is important because they are there's lots of practical, logistical things that they need to make progress in there and have the opportunity to continue to do research, right? Further, they will say, hey, what have you done, right? Or to show something that has. So I think that is certainly an important thing. Being in the right sort of conferences, being mentored and getting feedback in these conferences is important. I feel that, like, the pandemic year has been tough. That element is missing, even though we have the conferences. Personally, I feel, this missing element of not being able to walk by posters, learn like things, talk to people, like attend these talks, and so on. I hope that sort of we get over that part while we are able to put out a lot of information. There's information overload. So how do we curate that with the right sort of peer-reviewed and society, sort of technical society stamped sort of material is the most important thing, I feel. Yeah.
Finding people on the conferences, it's important, but there's also a lot of comments on whether the reviewer quality scores are in fact predictive of the paper impact, or whether the reviewers may be just inconsistent. You can just get lucky with these reviewers. So it makes us question the system, but then on the other hand, it's also very useful to get feedback and learn from the reviewers. And we just don't want a sea of publications where we cannot navigate, right? It's so hard to keep track of all the papers that come out. And if there was no peer review, then it would be even more, right? So do you have any comments on this?
Absolutely. You're touching upon a very important and a perennial challenge, right? Because one, there's a huge volume that is happening in our fields are very right now so active and dynamic worldwide, which is that's a good news. But at the same time, right, we depend on each other, right, peer review, to have quality sort of ways of judging and contextualizing the work. And as you said, right, this variability and is real, right, and also reviewer burden, right? Like there's only so many researchers, and there's a mismatch between the demand and the people that can handle it in a consistent way. And sure, so all the challenges you mentioned, Trina, in terms of sort of inconsistent reviews or not so thoughtful reviews, we've all experienced that, right? But overall, I think the system, people are working in a way that they have these multiple layers and checks and balances. They have technical committees, for example, right, interspeech, right, the area chairs that, they put in a lot of effort. I've been fortunate to have been, part of, organizing interspeech as area chair or, technical program chair or general chair. And I see them, I'm always so amazed at the contributions every single person puts in the effort, right? And as a result, they all add up and do, while there's noise in the system, like any human-oriented system, overall, the peer review process works, and people are continually trying to see how to improve that, to get the form of review, the type of review, the number of reviews, and how a paper, an idea makes an impact, right? That's a different question, right? Because it depends on the topic area. It might be a really interesting, important result, but it may be something that is of interest to only a few people, in which case it'll just impact those, and that's made it. Some are more sort of broadly sort of, a tool of interest or that everyone can use. Doesn't mean one is better than the other. It's just different, right? So some of these metrics are not necessarily sort of perfect either, but overall they kind of give us a feel for sort of, the quality of work and sort of impact people can create. But I think peer review and community-based efforts are sort of, very central to this research sort of mission that we're all engaged in. And that's also a way we educate ourselves, right? By reading and doing that. That's also part of the learning and education. So I feel like, PhD students, for example, are colleagues that are very important because they have to sort of also participate and contribute to this review process and learn, because not only are they a recipient of the reviews, but they also have to be, because that way they will learn, right? And so if they learn not to a different way that they want to see the review that they would like to see, right, in what they do, right? I found that, like, excellent work coming out of our students early on if they get trained because they put a lot of thoughtful effort.
Thank you for that. I think it's always really interesting to hear the view of someone that's so involved in this sort of process. Moving on to something completely different, we have a question that we've been dying to ask since the beginning of this conversation.
Sure.
As we probably have mentioned, you're a professor. You have a family. You have almost 1,000 publications, over 40,000 citations, 2 companies. You're also a journal editor, and you probably do all sorts of other things that we don't know about. So our question is, how do you do all of that?
I don't know, not very well, probably. I love doing all these things, right? Because I said I'm fortunate that I have this opportunity to do some of these things, and it takes time. Some of these ideas and effort, I get excited by new ideas, and I like to follow up on them, and some of them work out, some of them don't. And I should. Say that, but it's always not for the lack of trying, and so I like to do that. And I just I feel that this field is really resonates with me, and because of its both scientific and intellectual opportunities it offers to us, but also the connections it provides to sort of making some contribution to society, and that kind of keeps you excited and going. And as I said, right, it is not my own thing. As I said in the beginning, this is whatever publications are. It's a reflection of all the people that I've had just amazing honor of working with, my mentors, my students, and and in fact, students are my mentors in a way. Right, I learn a lot from them every day because they're always coming up with ideas. You have this opportunity to work and interact with them. Colleagues from different fields, bring sort of a lot of interesting perspective and knowledge. So it's sort of that's an exciting sort of possibility. Our field sort of is very nicely positioned for that. Maybe some other field may not have all these various connections, but this kind of has been exciting journey.
But this exciting journey, I'm sure it has its ups and downs, right? So there are titles and there are awards, but there's, I'm sure, all other untold stories. So are there any mistakes or difficult periods that perhaps helped you grow as a person or as a researcher?
Absolutely. All these CVs and so on only put all the things that you got. You don't know how many rejections and and all kinds of fronts, challenges, both technical, intellectual ideas that just don't pan out and work. They've been sort of useful as a stepping stone for others, but it's still sort of challenging. So just like everyone, I've also go through, to date, getting papers rejected, proposals sent back. So, I feel the frustration and say, oh my God, reviewer 2 is just awful. And reviewer 2 is always awful, right? So all those are true, and that happens. And I always joke that, as you just grow older, it's like the rings in a tree which tell you how many sort of rejections and challenges in this field. But this is the field we have chosen in a way, right? Because it's sort of, it's built for that. While exciting things that happen, and things work out, and you feel best paper award or this recognition is nice. Behind that, right, there's a lot of energy and effort, and that happens. And so I'm no different from any other researcher, out there. So as particularly since we are talking to PhD students, but and so this is a part of thing. There's always going to be challenges between triumphs, and I think the challenge is always it's a hard thing. It's easy to say, but hard to practice. When in my role as advisor to sort of PhD students, I say, well, learning from the challenges and building upon that is important. So when we respond to reviews, right, I always feel that actually is a very important step. For example, in trying to build sort of how we can learn from that experience. What is that? Not beyond just the specific technical aspects. The general meta aspects of that are important. Same thing, right? Now,
I think we all agree that it's super inspiring the way that you can see everything with that much optimism. I think, and I guess all of us think it's really, really cool. Well, Shri, we have learned a lot about you in this conversation, but we feel that there are still unanswered questions, and anticipating this, we prepared a lightning interview consisting of a series of questions that we would like for you to answer quickly and without much thought. Some questions have two scenarios for you to choose from, and others are just open-ended. So, can we begin?
Go for it.
Okay, so first question. If you had a warning label, what would it say?
Don't touch it.
What's the amazing career path that you left behind?
Being a doctor.
Lassi or soda?
Lassi.
Do you prefer work while everyone is already sleeping, or work while everyone is still sleeping?
Still sleeping.
Do you prefer to be an advisor to a very disciplined PhD student or to a very passionate PhD student?
Passionate student.
What's your favorite food?
Oh, Indian food.
Oh, okay, so let me specify. What's your favorite dish?
Favorite dish? Dosas. These are crepes, South Indian crepes.
What is the best part of a conference?
Oh, people just hanging out. Post-conference.
If you were to organize a team building activity for your lab, which activity would you choose?
Well, we often go to a bar and talk, and
what's in your letter to Santa?
Be able to sort of, move around and travel freely. This year, if I were to write a letter to Santa, I missed that.
So that's it for a lightning interview. And before we wrap up, we have a final question. So if you could choose any person, dead or alive, to have dinner with, who would that person be? Keep in mind that we would get you the funding to have the meal, to pay for the meal.
Anyone, I have, a lot of musicians that I love, that no longer alive. And, I'm a student and a musician of South Indian classical variety. And so I'd love to go meet and see, very inspired by what they've done. A bunch of them. The names may not be familiar to you all, but, I'd love to go see them, have a meal, or just meet them.
Thank you so much, Shri, for joining us today, for answering all the questions, and for the great conversation.
Thank you, Katrina, Francisco, and Narayanan, for inviting me and talking to me. It was so much fun just to think about all these things I've never thought about this way. And so, thanks for the opportunity, and thank you for the great work that you're doing for ISCA and building this community. And I really appreciate that, what you're all doing. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Good luck and best wishes with all your work.
Thank you. And also thanks to everyone that's listening to this episode of Speech Pitch. Stay tuned for future episodes. We might interview your favorite speech researcher.
Speech pitch by Iska Sak.